Hi and welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Brit Smith. To mark National Women's Equality Day, which is on August 26, we're going to delve into what it takes to become one of the very few female CEOs in cannabis and CBD. Women make up about a third of all the CEOs across all industries in the US, and women hold around a third of all C-suite positions as well. In the cannabis industry, women held around 37% of C-suite positions before the pandemic, so a little bit above the average industry. But since COVID, that's dropped to 22%. But when it comes to the title of CEO in the cannabis industry, only 8% are women. Now, there are many reasons why it's harder for women to get in and to make it as leaders of any industry, let alone legal weed. And many of them are systemic. For example, according to Yahoo Finance, valuations for women who raise capital in cannabis can be 30 to 40% less than similar male-led companies. Women-led businesses also usually get fewer resources like mentorship and strategic guidance. So how can women successfully lead in a relatively young and only semi-legal industry like cannabis and CBD? This episode, we're going to get inspired by the story of the so-called Dolly Parton of hemp, Franny Tacy, founder and CEO of Franny's Farmacy. Now, trust me when I say Franny is a powerhouse, not just in the CBD and cannabis space, but in the world in general, so take notes. Franny comes from a farming background in Tennessee. She studied forestry in the early 90s, where she learned about growing hemp plants on the side. She worked in and then left the world of pharmaceuticals, and she taught agricultural business, all before she jumped into the world of legal cannabis and hemp. Over the past decade, simply due to her passion for the plant, Franny became an integral part of getting hemp plants back in the ground in North Carolina. In fact, in 2017, after she helped get the state laws passed to allow the resurgence of hemp, Franny unwittingly became the first female hemp farmer in North Carolina in 75 years. She then became the first in the US to give a TEDx talk on growing hemp as a crop. In the last few years, while the numbers say that a lot of women in cannabis have been struggling, Franny has managed to grow from that single store to a successful franchise across 6 states. She's built a network that includes everyone from local female farmers to celebrity collaborators like fashion designer Christian Siriano, who's about to start selling Franny's hemp pasta in his own stores. Yes, hemp pasta. Like, could Franny have just bought us the perfect pasta replacement that we have all been waiting for? Like I said, we're about to learn from a true powerhouse of a woman. So we'll be right back to talk about succeeding as a female CEO in cannabis with Franny Tacy. Franny, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure. We've met a couple times in person now, but I actually don't know too much about your backstory. So let's start with where you're from and where you grew up.
I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh.
So it was a rather conservative place to a family of engineers and Episcopal ministers, and a very different way in the South, but went to college and lived out west for 8 years and was in forestry school, read The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and lost the childhood delusions pretty quick at about 18.
Right. You studied forestry?
I did.
Wow.
There was no such thing as sustainable agriculture at that time. There was 3 forestry schools across the country. So that's how I went across the country to study really sustainable agriculture. My dad was a farmer and my mother was a corporate businesswoman.
Oh, wow.
And so I am the middle child, and both my sisters got no farming, but I got a lot of that. They've been calling me nature mama since I was a little kid running around in diapers with a foxtail sticking out of there.
Wow, so you've always really been into agriculture, and your dad being a farmer, I can see why that sort of connected you to the land. I guess you saw a lot of that growing up. Were you raised like on the farm?
My parents divorced when I was very young. And so it was, I say, although I was grew up on a farm. It was every other weekend, and summers, it was a lot of riding horses and planting flowers and really the fun stuff that made it so glamorous. This is what we all do, right? We take all the
Hmm.
good things from our childhood and we just hang on to that and try to keep that throughout our lives.
Yeah.
And that is all I ever wanted to do since I was little, was have a farm. I was not the woman that dreamed of white dresses and a Prince Charming. I dreamed of farm, a farm and gardens. And for my mother, every year since I was 8, and my wise old witchy neighbor, and she looked just like a witch, who was my best friend, taught me how to plant flowers for a garden for my mother when she was 8. I have planted her a garden every year.
Mm.
So I just love being with the land.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So eventually, after you'd studied out west in Arizona, you came back to the east, the
Yeah,
south, I guess.
yeah.
Now you're back in North Carolina. So let's talk about what you're doing now with Franny's Farmacy. So you obviously came back and you were like, all right, I'm getting myself a farm. and you kicked it off.
It didn't quite happen like that. There was a couple of decades in between there where I was in forestry. Then I went to graduate school for my master's in education. I brought Smokey the Bear in school systems and all sorts of fun things.
Ooh.
And then I moved to Asheville to work on my doctoral work with Smithsonian Institute, which was brain research and teaching with the brain in mind.
Hmm.
But while I was there, quickly determined that I needed to make money, pay back a forestry degree, didn't want to be in the school systems, and I switched to pharmaceuticals. So I have well over a decade of pharmaceutical career. It really also tied into all that science. I was very much a science and researcher. I've done 11 crop trials before I was the first person to plant hemp.
Wow.
And I love trials and research and science, and ended up getting into pharmaceuticals, was a manager, managed a $10 million territory, then a $100 million region, and spent my rotations in manufacturing and marketing and sales and training. And then it hit me so hard when, once you learn, this is my claim to fame. I love to teach people things. And once you learn, you can't unlearn.
Mm-hmm.
And once I learned it's the unhealthcare industry over that 10 years of discovery and discovery, and more, it became unbearable. And those last few years was pharma to farm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I bought my farm and was planning my exit. I was like, I will not work in this industry. As it became more, and that's when Medicare came on. I remember in pharmaceuticals when Blue Cross Blue Shield was a nonprofit. They
Wow.
are definitely for profit now, but
Oh,
we don't
yeah.
have Sisters of Mercy and other healthcare. And so the more we privatize healthcare, the more unhealthy it became.
Mm-hmm.
And I have never eaten fast food. I have never bought my son, who is 27, never bought him a soda, never took him through a drive through.
Wow.
I've never bought a meal in our town that wasn't owner and operated. I am very dedicated to health and wellness and values, and always have been.
Yeah, sounds like the pharmaceutical, like the inside of the pharmaceutical world really stirred you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was very disillusioned early on. I mean, it was great. I was like, finally, I had paid off loans, was able to buy a house. And then I was like, there is no money that can be made that will allow me to continue doing what I do. And even sold a life saving drug,
Mm.
in respiratory. But farming a farm. And so I bought my farm. It took me 3 years to be able to quit my job, and was all involved in hemp and research and helping the farmers here. North Carolina was the 5th state to come online. And I was teaching business of farming when I found out, little card table and a guy with a poster board that said, "Let farmers grow hemp." And I'm like, what? Yes. And
Yeah.
so I helped the whole system. My business partner and COO was part of that too, to raise $500,000, get 200,000 signatures, develop a co-op, find a university to partner with. And we did all this. And the 5th time it went to pass, it finally passed through the state. And they called me, they were like, "Here we go. You need to plant." And I'm like, "No."
What?
I went out to find, I asked every woman, I said, I want it to be a female farmer. And I recruited about 10 of my girlfriends
Mm.
on farms. And they were like, no way, you have to do it. So I ended up planning. And because I had all these seeds that we had negotiated through this co op, and I couldn't find anybody else to do it, I gave it to 2 research centers that are affiliated with NC State. Started a women in hemp nonprofit, raised money to fund these researchers so that I had real expertise and we could put it in a trial like I had done so many times before throughout my life. I didn't even know I was the first female to be plant hemp in this state, which made me the 11th in the country until 8 months after I had planted. I had planted, harvested, we had a party. We were trying to figure out any and everything you could do with this crop. And boom, I got some award. I was like, what?
So you were the first female hemp farmer in North Carolina in 75 years. I mean, it took you 8 months to figure out that that was the title, but like, what did it actually feel like to put that first plant in the ground? Because you knew it was going to be something historic.
It was so interesting. And as much as people think I might be cool because this is all cannabis, I grew for food and fiber the first year.
Yeah.
And I've had a food business. That was what the farm was. And the farm had been around, I bought a cattle pasture that was around for a while. So really shocked to find out that I was the first. I had no idea. And that unfolded into a lot of people needing to know information. So I talked free to over 30,000 farmers in the first couple of years, setting criteria, what I'd learned. I was like, don't grow more than an acre. Don't do it.
Right. You were just like passing along what you could learn about hemp because there wasn't a whole lot else out there about hemp.
Nothing.
What year was this? Like 2012?
17.
2017?
Yeah.
Wow. So,
I mean, they call me legacy, but I was like, that's not very long. It makes me feel old. But I will say there has been I've had a lot of connections and kind of the underground, silent, whatever you want to say, in the Oregon market for well over a decade, and very much a proponent of this plant, and switched obviously into cannabis the second year, opened dispensaries, started a manufacturing plant, which was my real passion because I've been making products for like 30 years. We were making tinctures and growing cannabis 30 years ago when I was in forestry school.
right.
I had a farm then. I have what they call a commune, but we didn't have those words then. When I went to forestry school, I didn't know anybody there, not one person. They had what I wanted to learn.
No stigma to be had.
And I went out there and rented a farm and found all my people, a baker, a farmer that helped me with chickens, a cannabis growers, another forester, property man. And we had a commune, apparently. Now that's what they call it.
That's cool. So you took like all of that knowledge that you'd learned out there, and it wasn't just directly from the school, but from the community around the school, and brought it back to your part of the world. And so when you moved from growing hemp to cannabis, so it's not legal yet in North Carolina above 0.3% THC, is that right?
Right.
So how is it cannabis? Like, how is that differentiated?
That's a very good question. And I really also want to steer people. I was the first person in the country to do a TED Talk on hemp as a crop. So you can look up Franny on TED to get some more information. So right now people are miffed. They're like, in North Carolina, it's not necessarily legal, but y'all have everything in the market. And we are the first state that moved under the USDA guidelines. And so it's very interesting to be able to offer products that span the whole health and wellness and recreational span that meet the federal guidelines under 0.3. But what that means is we have everything that can also get you into the headspace, to physical, topicals, pets, any and everything.
This is so confusing. Each state is so confusing to me. So, I mean, there's the 2018 Farm Bill, which essentially allowed hemp across any U.S. state. You were already under the 2014 Farm Bill, so it just sort of changed what was recognized as hemp. So it became more proliferate, but you